Chapter 21. Personal Tools. The next morning, when Dominic came down for breakfast, there was a small pile of gear in the middle of the floor that he knew hadn't been there the night before. "What's all this? Do you need me to put it away while you work?" He called out to Pops, who was in the storage room. "No need. That's all for you. You made it to level 2 apprentice blacksmithing, and it's traditional for your master to gift you your first set of tools when you advance for the first time. Know that after this, you'll need to make your own tools, so take good care of them." The old dwarf called back. There was a collection of chisels, files, and sharpening stones, a small anvil, a stone travel forge stocked with coal, tongs, pokers, a leather roll pouch with pockets for everything, and a short-handled 2-kilogram hammer, much like the one that Pops used, except brand new. "This is beautiful. Thank you," Dominic informed him with a heartfelt smile when he came back into the forge room. "I'm glad you like it. Pack all that away and head out front. We should have morning customers soon, and as a level 2 apprentice you'll need to take a traveling mission soon. Even if you weren't planning on trying for a job at the palace to make weapons for the lovely ladies of the Royal Guard," Pops explained. Dominic had never heard anything like a travel requirement, so maybe it was just a blacksmith thing. But then, above apprentices were journeymen. Perhaps the name was literal, and you really had to go on a journey before you could advance. But he was only level 2 right now, and his blacksmithing trade skill gem had to reach level 5 before he could move from the apprentice to journeyman ranks. The bell above the door rang, and a pair of adventurers came in looking for a shovel, and then another group for a saw blade. It was the usual rhythm of the morning, just as Pops had warned him. A few last-minute purchases by the adventurers headed out early, and then the farmers and tradesmen would come in an hour or two for tools, after which the morning would get quiet, and they could work. He was just about to head into the back room to join Pops when a stout man in a gaudy purple coat and gold vest came wobbling into the shop, looking somewhat disdainful at his surroundings. "How might I help you this morning, good sir?" Dominic greeted him. "Who are you?" "I'm here to talk to the Master Smith. Go fetch him," the man demanded. "Master Smith, there is a portly gentleman here to speak with you," Dominic called back into the forge, while pretending that he didn't hear the angry grumbling of the man behind him. Pops came out with his signature dour expression, and the snobbish man actually smiled. "It is good to see you again, Master Smith. I was told that you might be able to help me find an apprentice smith who is qualified for traveling work. My blacksmith quit on me, and there are 22 steam wagons in my caravan, ready to leave for Heir's village." Pops chuckled and tilted his chin toward Dominic. "That's my apprentice, but I don't know that he's going to work for you after you insulted him. Since when do dwarves take little mixed blood, mutts, as apprentices? Now, where is your actual apprentice? I need to get these goods underway, and we can't go without a maintenance smith," the man replied. They both just stared at him and waited for the merchant to realize that they were serious. But that never happened, and instead he stomped out in a rage only a few seconds later. The next half hour was quiet except for the ringing of hammers on anvils as the pair worked at making the day's tool orders, and then finally the bell jingled again, marking a new customer. "I'll be up front in a second." "Which order was yours?" Dominic called out, assuming it was one of the farmers or craftsmen there to pick up tools they had ordered yesterday. "Actually, I need to speak to one of the smiths here," a pleasant male voice called back. Dominic came out to greet the customer and found a slender man in a bright gold coat over a black suit with cogwork accessories and a matching top hat. "What can I help you with today? We got a pretty good stock of equipment for merchants," he suggested. "Well, you see, some blithering jackass came to my caravan and stole my blacksmith away with the promise of a huge bonus, so I need a repair worker for my next trip," he replied, while nervously rubbing the back of his neck. Dominic heard Pop's laughter from the back room, and he gave the merchant a sad smile. "I'm afraid that's partially our fault. He was being an ass, so we refused his employment offer and kicked him out of the shop." The merchant smirked. "Serves him right. I'm sure my man will come back once we get to Heir's village and he gets his bonus, but I need someone to get us there. You never know when something is going to break, and for that, we need a smith." Pops gestured to Dominic. "My apprentice has just reached level 2, and he's ready for his first trip, but this is a toolmaker's forge, not a steam smith. While he knows his way around the forge, we don't work with steam motors, Magitech drives, or any other sorts of vehicles. The man just shrugged. At this point, any smith will do. I know how the trucks work, but I don't have the skill to fix them in anything resembling a timely manner. I took merchant as my trade skill. I can show him what to fix if it breaks, as long as he has the skill to fix it. That shouldn't be a problem. He can help with the weapons for your guards as well. That is part of the job he excels at. The old dwarf informed him proudly. Really? Dominic took out the dagger he made last night and set it on the counter between them. To someone with a merchant's magical skills for item evaluation, a crafted item's creator was easily discernible, and the man's skepticism turned to shock as he saw that Dominic had indeed been the one to create the weapon. Once he was done examining it, Dominic put the weapon away and waited for his verdict. That is incredible workmanship for an apprentice. All right, I will hire you at the standard rate, 2 gold coins a day, plus materials for any services we need. He agreed. 2 whole gold a day. Plus he supplied all the materials? That was almost too good to be true. He suspected that there would be a lot of work to be done, but for that sort of money, he wouldn't argue. Chapter 22. Earned Wages. After only 2 hours of traveling with his temporary employer, Dominic learned just why the wage was so high for a simple trip down the road. He had been using his newly minted skills to repair blunted weapons and poor attempts at sharpening when the cries of warning had sounded out from the back of the caravan. Goblins in the woods. Send the guards back. They're almost on us. The driver of the last transport wagon in line was shouting. More goblins coming from the flank. The guard beside Dominic's carriage yelled. He was halfway down the convoy, the most protected spot during most ambushes, and equal distance to both ends to distribute the spare ammunition and weapons. All of the guards climbed down from their position by the drivers, while the team members who were skilled with ranged weapons moved to the roof of the armored cargo boxes. There weren't nearly enough of them, only 3 archers, 1 mage, and a gunner to cover 18 wagons, but the goblins were closing fast. Traveling through the woods, it made sense that they hired more melee fighters, but there were also guns in the blacksmith's carriage for times when they could react before the enemy arrived. Those with no combat skills, or even those with a melee skill set, could use the shotguns while relying on their own hand-eye coordination, which was a blessing for the merchant caravans. But against monsters with higher defense, the shotguns became much less effective as the monster hides got tougher. The gunslingers, rangers, and a few other specialties could use skills or spells to enhance the weapons and keep them effective against more powerful enemies. For the first part of the battle, Dominic only had to toss weapons to anyone who lost or broke theirs, but this group was pretty professional, and the chances that someone had a lost or broken weapon they forgot to mention was pretty slim. Spears. The caravan leader shouted, and the guards took out what looked like fence panels made of poles, linked with 1 metal rod, and topped with brutal barbed spearheads. It helped make up for their low numbers, and the first few goblins didn't even have an opportunity to stop before they skidded into the spear lines and were crushed by those behind them. The guards didn't hold on to them. Once the momentum of the goblin charge was stalled, they switched to their usual weapons. Steel meat goblin flesh and copper while Dominic picked his first target. He was about to unleash an arcane blast on the goblins when a sharp whistle caught his attention. The driver was motioning for him to wait and not draw attention to himself. Everyone on the team could and would fight, but they only had 1 blacksmith, and the carriages were almost guaranteed to take damage during the fight. As the number of goblins increased, the drivers took shotguns from their storage items or from under the seats and prepared to defend their livelihood. Smoke filled the air as the guns began to fire, and the closest goblins fell one after another. The defenders were still greatly outnumbered, and Dominic sighed at the lost chance for mana cores and loot, but his carriage was well defended, and his driver had taken a staff out of his inventory instead of a gun. Dominic hadn't noticed before, but the driver of his carriage was a cleric, the caravan's healer. It explained the number of defenders that collected around them and the way that everyone in the ranged team kept track of what was happening around their carriage. 1 goblin made it past the guards, and Dominic took it out with an arcane blast, dropping it instantly. 1 kill was better than sitting and doing nothing, and at the rate the guards were eliminating the goblins, he wouldn't get many more. It all looked like it was going smoothly until there was a loud clang and a hissing noise. A goblin had managed to hide from the guards and attack a carriage, puncturing the steam chamber to immobilize it and buy time for more of its kinsfolk to get there. Blacksmith to position 7. The driver yelled, marking the location of the damaged vehicle. On it, Dominic yelled back as he grabbed some spare metal plates, then the torch and a handful of brazing rods. It would be a quick and dirty repair, but it would be better than letting the water completely drain. He ran across the top of the carriages and up the line to the damaged vehicle, where the driver was dragging the goblin's body out from underneath. He got the return valve with a club. The driver called as he heard the blacksmith land on the roof of the cargo box. "No problem, I've got it." The driver knew his vehicle, and he'd released the pressure after he killed the goblin, saving most of the water and making it possible for Dominic to work as soon as he arrived. The valve wasn't completely knocked off, so Dominic used a block and hammer to knock it straight again, and then sealed the crack with a seam of new brass. Good to go. Give it a moment to cool, and you can pressure it back up. He informed the driver, then spotted another goblin headed toward them, crawling through the grass. He fired another arcane blast while he searched the ground for bodies that weren't actually dead. Everywhere that he saw one still twitching, Dominic attacked, keeping the area around the wagons clear until the fight was over. "Everyone back on board. Let's get gone before their friends arrive." The boss shouted, and Dominic ran back to his ride. The smithy wagon's driver was busy healing the guards, but he looked up when Dominic returned to the mobile forge. "Might as well get that heated now. We've got lots to fix." "How bad off is the carriage?" the cleric asked. "Damaged valve. I've got it fixed already." "No worse than a broken tool handle," he replied. "That's a relief. Those delaying tactics are the worst. It's like every monster in the forest knows when you're broken down." He muttered as he prepared the carriage to get moving again. "Do these attacks happen a lot?" Dominic asked, fearing the worst. "Come to think of it, they've gotten a lot worse these last few months. At first, I thought it was our bad luck, but we've been attacked more than once every trip, and everyone else is complaining about goblins as well. We're not in the mountains where you expect dangerous sorts of monsters, so this many attacks is unusual." Chapter 23. Push Hard. As soon as everyone was on board, the steam carriages started moving again, trundling down the rough dirt road and out toward the grasslands and open fields that surrounded their destination. Once they were out of the trees, they should be relatively safe from attack, as the town guard patrols would be able to see and intercept any threats that might be coming their way. Or so Dominic had hoped. Instead, what they found was an ongoing battle between the guards and a much larger band of goblins, along with nearly 24 destroyed carriages. The guards saw the wagon caravan emerge from the road behind the goblin force, picking up speed as the road's quality improved closer to town, and began to frantically wave them forward before the lead steam tractor could try to stop. "Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. Once you're behind the lines, you will be safe," the guard captain yelled as the caravan approached. The team leader shouted back down the line of vehicles as he got the command. "You heard the man. Keep the speed up. Ranged fighters, give it your all. Everyone else, protect the wheels. Don't let them get us bogged down, or we will be stuck in the trees." The first vehicle cleared the tree line a second later, and the gunner on the second carriage began to rain bullets on the goblins. Dominic had never seen a skill like that before, and the gunner hadn't used it during the last battle, but it was magnificent. They fired until their guns were empty, and then reloaded in the blink of an eye, and did it again. That had to be incredibly hard on the gunner's ammunition supply, but it kept the goblins away from the carriages, and the first few trucks were quickly past the melee without incident. The archers and mage were next up to guard the lines, while Dominic unleashed Arcane Blast on anything that got close enough to the vehicles that he could see it from his position halfway down the line. As his carriage got close to the tree line where he would be able to see a wider angle, Dominic noticed that there were precious few casters and ranged fighters at the back, only warrior classes with bows as their secondary weapon, and drivers with shotguns. They had been doing a decent job on the front half of the convoy, but they also had the support of stronger ranged classes, who had actual specialty skills to support their attacks. "You don't mind if I move back, do you? The back half is short on casters." Dominic called to his driver from the roof of the smithy carriage. "Why would you do that? I know you're a decent caster, but they can take care of themselves. Trust them." The driver called back. As much as Dominic was tempted to be stubborn, the man had a point. The team leader had set things up this way on purpose, and they hadn't lost anyone since the start of the trip, so it should all be working as intended. The guards had also gotten the goblin swarm a bit more under control during their battle, as the front of the convoy had done so much damage to the nearby enemies that the defenders who had already been in combat were able to regroup and force them away from the road again. If he had been thinking clearly and not caught up in the excitement of actually getting to be part of an adventure story, Dominic should have recognized the strategy. It was one that the knights in his childhood village were well versed in. So, from his spot on the roof, Dominic continued his barrage until the goblins were out of range, and the whole convoy was safely on the cobblestone road that led into Heir's village. As they bounced down the road, Dominic made note of 3 important facts. The quality of the workmanship on the spring steel made a huge difference in how the various vehicles rode. Secondly, the trucks that were custom-built for cargo were much more stable than the ones which were retrofitted from a horse-drawn carriage template. And third, the guards and merchants were hiding all their good weapons in their storage, or in hidden compartments of the carriages if they didn't have a storage item. "What are they doing?" he whispered to the healer who drove the mobile smithy. "Oh yes, this is your first trip. You see, there is an entry tax based on the value of goods that we carry, and we are supposed to show them everything that we've got so they can assess it. Take out your worst gear and pretend that the carriage's tools are all that you have. The boss has already accounted for their value in the trip's fees. The lower we can value our gear, the cheaper it is to get a trade caravan into the village." That seemed incredibly petty for a village that relied on trade goods for their survival, but perhaps that was just the way of the world in Signia, Dominic decided as he put his good weapons away and took out a non-magical goblin dagger to slip into the plain leather sheath on his hip. Even the fine traveling cloaks went away, replaced with threadbare, unenchanted versions for the benefit of the guards. Dominic didn't have that luxury. All he had was the leather coat and the work clothes that he arrived in, and he hadn't been working anywhere near long enough for a new leather apron to wear out. "You should at least try to fool them. Don't you have a piece of goblin armor in your inventory?" The healer laughed when he noticed that Dominic hadn't changed his outfit. Dominic swapped his coat out for a hobgoblin shirt that he had in his inventory cube, intended to be washed and used as a shop rag, then shuddered in revulsion as the filthy cloth touched his skin. The healer chuckled and waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. "Better change back. They'll believe that even less than they would a boy in a set of palace initiate's armor pretending to be a merchant. Maybe put your smithy apron on instead of the coat, and they'll just see a penniless apprentice on his first trip." That was precisely what Dominic was, though. He didn't get paid in advance, so he was still very much a penniless apprentice, but he had a good apron, courtesy of Pops, and he changed into that instead of his only leather coat, then swung down into the smithy carriage to wait for their turn in line. Chapter 24. Heir's Village. As they reached the front of the line and prepared to enter Heir's village, Dominic heard a pounding on the armored door of his carriage and swung the entry open to greet the guard. As he saw the guard's clothing rough linen under his guard-issue chain mail, Dominic got a great idea. He had minor illusion available to him, and it wouldn't take much to change the appearance of his leather apron to a cheaper plain leather one, filthy with soot in a way suited to having been in the forge all day. A shimmer passed over him as he altered his clothing, but in the heat haze coming from the door, the guard didn't notice anything at all. Only a few seconds later, when the heat of the forge wagon had dissipated a little, did he look back in the door again to actually inspect Dominic. The man leaned in the door, then stepped back as the wind shifted and a wave of heat from the forge burst out of the entry, but did have time to take note of Dominic's sweaty but smiling face in the entryway. "Move the apron aside, so I can check your weapons," he demanded in a monotone voice that let Dominic know he was just doing his job. He nodded as he looked at the crude hilts of the daggers and then the plain linen clothes under the brand-new, but dirty apron. Must have been a rough day if they brought a fresh green apprentice as their smith, he commented. Dominic chuckled as he remembered the words that the boss had used. Some pompous jackanape offered their usual smith a big bonus to go with him for the trip, so I got the call up at the last minute. "Most money I've seen in my life." The guard laughed along with him. "I'll bet it is." It's not often that an apprentice sees a whole gold coin, and even more rare that he will earn more than one at a time. I suggest that you ask him to split it into golden pennies or silver coins when you get paid tonight, so that you don't have to hope that the shops have enough change. That is an excellent idea. Thank you, Dominic replied, honestly impressed with the professionalism of the guard, who he noticed carried both a sword and a pistol on his hips. He passed on to the next carriage, and the healer gave Dominic a thumbs up and a sly wink, then lit a cigarette while they waited. He considered saying something about them being bad for his health, but that was the healer. He didn't really have to worry about such a small thing. Once the inspections were finished, the carriages passed through the gates, and the leader directed them down a path that seemed familiar to everyone but Dominic, winding through the streets toward whatever customer had requested their goods today. They eventually found themselves in a smaller version of the gathering square that was across from Pop's Forge in the city, and Dominic noticed that it was set up more like a flea market than a parking lot. "Do you just sell everything right here?" he asked his driver, confused by the sight in front of them. "Some do, but we have a buyer. The problem is that the streets get crowded, since the whole village is filled with tightly packed apartment buildings. So we park here, and the buyer sends someone to get it. The big transport vehicles can't make it down the side streets without completely blocking them in both directions," he explained. One by one, the boss handed out the day's pay as he made his way down the row, but he paused just before Dominic's wagon as a man on crutches with visible wounds and bandages on his face hobbled his way to the convoy. "Goddess, Tom, what in the world happened to you?" the boss shouted, then ran over to help the man up into the smithy carriage. The healer followed them in, quickly casting a series of spells on the wounded man, who was slumped in the well-worn bench seat of the carriage like he was home. "That idiot and his damnable promise of a big trip bonus is what happened to me. We were running from the goblins, and we had just made the clearing outside town when he ordered that we spread out and fight. Those idiots listened to him, but they didn't have a decent fighter among them, and the goblins had 3 shamans. We didn't have enough ranged fighters to take on the shamans, and the caravan guards were scraped up from the street, mostly academy dropouts who couldn't tell their ass from a tea kettle. They managed to lose to a bunch of ragtag goblins, and they probably would have even without the shaman's help. When the guards showed up to help, I packed my things and moved to the back to keep them supplied with arrows. It cost me my whole stock, but I made it back to town. They didn't have a healer left to deal with the injuries, and the goblins got the convoy leader as well. Turns out, he didn't even have enough on his body to pay the wages. He was betting that he would get enough from the sales to make a profit and pay us out the promised bonuses. The carriages are all trashed now, and the goods are mostly ruined, so the survivors couldn't even sell those to make up the difference," Tom explained. The healer patted him on the shoulder and pulled a blanket from under the seat. "Go to bed and sleep it off. We can scold you for greed and stupidity in the morning. It's good to have you back." The smith chuckled as he stretched out on the seat, finally noticing Dominic in the carriage, sitting next to the forge. "Is that my replacement? Heck, as cute as he is, I'm surprised you didn't kick me out on my year," he joked. "He's a fine spellcaster as well. Picks off goblins like nobody's business, and each spell is a sure kill. If he was a fully trained smith, you might be in trouble." The convoy leader teased his old friend, before handing Dominic his day's wages in silver coin. "Oh, where did you find that kind of multi-talented smith?" Tom asked. "He's Pop's apprentice." "Well, that's good luck for me. He will want his apprentice back after the return trip, I suppose. The old man doesn't take to very many people, so if he took an actual apprentice, he won't let his new one go so easily." Chapter 25, Overnight Stay. Dominic laughed as the smith and the boss shared stories of their trip, then realized that it was beginning to get late, and he hadn't made any arrangements for the night. With their usual smith back, he wouldn't be welcome to sleep in the forge carriage, even if it was big enough, so he should start looking for a hotel now that he had his wages. There was an inn nearby, but it was all marble walls, with guards at the doors in fancy armor and high-leveled skill gems. That looked far too expensive for his wallet. "Hey Tom, is there an inn here that I might actually be able to afford?" Dominic asked as he made sure he hadn't left anything in the other man's forge. "That's the only one in town with an open room. I was going to stay there if you lot got delayed for the night." You're welcome to put up a hammock on the far side if you like, but I will warn you that I snore. But if you can catch her, I think that our gunner, Bella, has a friend here in town, and she will likely be staying over there. You might be able to get a couch with them. The farmers are always happy to have a Real Smith stay over for a few hours' work," he suggested. The gunner was still laughing with the ranger up near the front of the convoy as the locals unloaded the cargo. The guards' jobs weren't finished until the cargo was unloaded and paid for, while the smith was on duty until the carriages were fixed and good to go again. They were lucky and didn't take much, if any, damage this time, so the boss hadn't requested anything of him after they arrived. He had just paid and left him with Tom, who was nursing his aching bones after being healed of his injuries. Dominic waved goodbye to the smith and hopped down from the oversized carriage with a shiver as he adjusted to the lack of heat from the forge. "Bella, was it? I'm Dominic, the smith for the trip. Tom said that you might know a spot that I could rent a bed for a few nights. Somewhere more reasonable than that gaudy inn," Dominic asked as he approached the guards. The gunner pulled her hood back, revealing a mass of ginger-orange curls and an engagement ring on her hand, then smiled at him. "A smith and a caster? Yeah, I suppose that I might be able to find a room for you. I might even be able to find a hunting party for you if you would like to join us on a quest. You see, I've got my gunner skill gem up to level 4 and halfway to level 5, where I will get a pay increase, so I'm looking to head out of town for the week that the caravan is here and try to get some experience in. What do you say, you join me and my friend?" she asked. "Well, I know that you're good, but who is your friend?" "The ranger you've been flirting with," Dominic asked. "Oh no, he's just a good driver. We would make lousy party members. You'll like Wiz, he's a crusader, so he can double as our group's healer and our main tank. He's already got his holy stone to level 7, so he wouldn't normally go with a pair like us, but he's good-hearted, and the goblins have become a problem for his farm," Bella explained, using hand gestures to emphasize her points. One of the other guards chuckled at her animated response, then smiled at Dominic. "Normally, I would caution against 2 kids in love and a half-grown smith going out to fight goblins together, but Wiz doesn't count. That's not a kid, that's a pit bull in a kilt, with a face to match." He laughed. Bella smacked him on the arm. "Don't let him hear you say that, or he will beat you again." The clock on the nearby hotel chimed 6 o'clock, and the group began to break up their meetings to start cooking dinner. The caravan leader provided the supplies for meals as part of the deal, and technically, they were all still employees for the rest of the day, so Dominic sat down next to Bella and helped her chop potatoes for the evening meal. The stew was simple, but that was normal for traveling groups everywhere that Dominic had passed through since his hometown had been destroyed. Only certain foods traveled well, and it was best to pick the ones that were cheap and plentiful. In this case, cured rabbit, potatoes, and beans that Dominic wasn't certain were going to be soft by the time that the meal was ready. It seemed that the caravan guards knew what they were doing, though, and after half an hour, the beans were splitting as he stirred the stew, and the handful of premixed spices that one of the others had added was smelling delicious. Even Tom managed to make his way out of bed to come for dinner, drawn by the smell of the stew pot as the last of the goods were cleared out of the carriages. Dominic filled himself a bowl and then helped serve the others, dishing out stew as fast as they could hold out their bowls. The pot was huge, and Dominic wondered if the plan was to have leftovers so they didn't need to cook for the next day or 2. But as he served, more people started to arrive. They were the warehouse workers who had moved the goods, along with a few downtrodden locals who looked like they could use a good meal. The boss gestured for them to keep serving, right until the pot was empty. The number of happy locals made Dominic realize that he had overlooked one of the most important parts of being a merchant: public relations. If the people didn't like you, it cost more to get unloaded, it got harder to sell your goods, and you didn't get as good of prices for them when you did sell them. It was getting later in the evening when the meal was finished, and Bella pulled Dominic to his feet. "We need to get going. They closed the gate in an hour, and Wiz lives outside the town walls on a farm. It's only a few minutes from the gate. We will make it there well before dark," the surprisingly muscular Mystic Gunner declared. "All right, I'm with you. There is no need to panic. We're only a few minutes from the gates." Dominic agreed. They rushed through the crowded streets, earning amused glances from the locals, who assumed they were off to some shop or another before everything closed for the night. The village didn't keep lanterns lit during the evening, so other than a few taverns, the villagers mostly closed for business at dusk, using the closing of the gates as their last call for customers. Chapter 26 Wiz. 15 minutes later, the duo found themselves in front of a small whitewashed farmhouse, with chickens in the yard, pigs out back, and one big shaggy dog on the porch. It was the perfect picture of farm life, and to Dominic, who was used to a culture that was a mix of techno-magic or sorcery-infused everything, it was like someone had made a rustic postcard reel. As they approached, the door swung open with a bang, and a massive man in a simple tartan kilt, with his muscular chest bare, came running out with his arms spread. "Bella, it is so good to see you again. I was just telling Mother that we should come looking for you tomorrow. I was sure that it was your caravan that we saw charge through the battle this afternoon. Was anyone hurt? How is your gear holding up?" He asked in a rapid-fire barrage that even Bella's guns would struggle to keep up with. His youthful eagerness was at complete odds with his massive body. It was rather cute how happy he was to see her home safely. "Wiz, we're fine. Better than fine, since Dominic here spent the whole trip fixing our gear instead of pretending that he was too busy. He's agreed to come along with us to hunt goblins, and he's a caster as well as a blacksmith," Bella explained. An older man's head stuck out of the window at the word blacksmith. "Did I hear that right? Little Bella brought us a smith? An actual proper smith, not some hack from the farrier that doesn't even have the skill?" the older man asked. Dominic smiled at who he assumed was Wiz's father. "Yes, I'm a proper smith, though I'm still a newer apprentice. This is my first trip out of the forge, and that's only because Bella's team was short of a smith to fix the vehicles if they were attacked." His face lit up with joy at the news. "Good, perhaps you can fix this for me." He gestured to something inside, and Bella motioned for him to go ahead while she caught up with Wiz. "Good to meet you, you can call me Terry, and over here is my wife June. Now, we had a minor incident a few weeks back, and I don't know how to fix it myself, but I'm betting that you do," he explained, with a gesture toward a sword on the table, broken into 3 parts. It had been a common grade magical weapon, but not a great one. Now, it was scrap iron, and Dominic wasn't sure how to tell him that you couldn't just fix a magical sword that badly damaged. "Well, I don't think that I can fix that at my level skill, but perhaps I could use the material to make up a new blade for you? It looks like it was made of decent iron," he suggested. It was made by the journeyman in town, and it was my son's favorite blade, until it suffered a minor incident with the flooring." Dominic gave him a confused look, and the man looked sheepish. "Well, you see, I didn't have a tool narrow enough to pull up that old floorboard, and you used a sword as a pry bar instead of letting the board keep squeaking? You're lucky you're his father." Dominic laughed. "Can you make him another blade? I know that most apprentices don't learn weapon making, but if you can make the raw material into something to get through until he can get another suitable weapon drop, I would be in your debt." Dominic smiled at the concerned father, who had made a massive mistake with his overgrown son's prized weapon. "I come from a toolmaker's forge. I can rebuild a sword easily enough, and if he has a monster core, I might even be able to bring back a bit of its magic." Dominic agreed. "Well, I've got a pile of coal out back if you've got a travel forge. That should be enough to get you started, I hope." Terry led him to the back of the house in the fading light, and into a small shed full of crudely made farm tools, with a pile of coal and a crude forge. That would be where he repaired his tools, but going by the quality of tools on the farm, it was clear that he didn't have much of a clue what he was doing, and just did his best to keep the farm running without burning through what little money they had. "Your forge will work well enough if I use the bellows from my travel forge to get the heat up. Let the others know that I'm out back, and I will get to work so that I can have this done by midnight." Dominic agreed, as he inspected the forge room. "All right, they'll be a bit anyhow. It usually takes them hours to talk when Bella comes back home for a visit." Terry agreed. "Are they related?" Dominic asked. "No. She grew up on the next farm over, before her pa passed on with a bad fever. That's when she went to the city and learned them fancy pistol tricks, you see. But our Wiz is taken with her, and we're hoping for a spring wedding." "All right, I'll learn the story from her in the morning. Unless you want to give me a hand with the bellows, I think I'm good to go." The older man laughed and tossed a bit of coal into the forge, then lit it with fire magic and kindling from a basket that looked like it had seen many years of use. I can get the forge going well enough. I might not be good for much, but I'm good for that. Dominic looked at him more closely and noticed that Terry's trade skill core was for a farmer, but he didn't see how that related to having fire magic, unless it was just enough to get the hearth and forge lit. He was good at it, pumping the bellows with a smooth rhythm born of practice, which got the metal heated and glowing in no time at all. I hope things get better soon. There's been a lot of talk about something riling up the goblins lately. They've been attacking everywhere, and they're far more organized than they should be. I reckon that the town will set a bounty on them soon, so keep a left ear from them when you go hunting. He explained as Dominic pounded the metal back into one block and tossed it back into the forge to heat. There are problems with the goblins closer to the city as well. Do you think that there is something else behind them? I had always thought that goblins weren't all that bright. Dominic asked. Might be. But the hobgoblins are smarter, and if they've got shamans or, deities forbid, a lord, then they could be a real nuisance. Dominic nodded. The goblin shamans were trouble. They've got both hobgoblins and shamans. I've seen both this week. Hopefully, there isn't anything worse. Chapter 27, Weaponsmith. Dominic and Terry talked for hours about the trials and tribulations of being a small-town farmer, and Dominic even found time to fix a few of his tools while the sword steel was refined and folded in preparation to make a new blade. Wiz was huge, over 190 centimeters tall, though neither of his parents were particularly large people, so it would be best to craft him a longer and wider blade than the original sword had been. It would fit his stature better, and even if he fought with a shield, it would still be comfortable to wield one-handed. Terry looked concerned as Dominic pounded out the rough shape of the blade, but as it began to take shape, he looked more impressed than any customer that Dominic had dealt with in the past. So far, the weapon wasn't even magical, but he was still glowing with joy that the damaged blade would be repaired to such a standard. Wiz and Bella came in just as Dominic was starting to hammer the shape of the grip, and gasped in shock at the sight in front of him. You didn't say that you were a weaponsmith. Bella gasped. I'm not. I'm a toolsmith. I just happen to know a few things about weapons for those who know not to mention it again. Dad said that you needed a monster core to try to reactivate the magic in the steel. Does it matter what it came from? Wiz asked. Well, there are no guarantees that it will work, so don't go wasting something you need, but I think I can get some magic out of this blade. Dominic agreed. There was no need to tell them that he knew a forge rune to guarantee that he would get an effect, and he could always chase them out of the forge as he worked. It would be excellent practice for his trade skill core, and it would buy a lot of goodwill from the big crusader. You know you have dragon fire, a voice whispered in his head. Dominic tried to ignore it so he wasn't distracted from his work. You don't have to show them the forge rune if you use dragon fire, the voice insisted. And how would that help? Dominic snarkily replied to the voice, wondering if he was going insane. Dragon fire has magic. Use it in place of the rune. The voice insisted. Fine, but if this fails, it's on you. How he would hold a voice in his head liable for his failure was a mystery, even to himself. But it had seemed like the right thing to say. While Dominic was talking to himself, or rather the voices in his head, Wiz had taken out a goblin shaman core and placed it by the forge. Will that do? He asked. It will be perfect. Now, I just need to grind it while this heats, and we will be ready to start. The process is a bit unique, and I'm not sure that anyone else would do it this way, but it should awaken some magic in the steel. Dominic offered, just in case the process didn't work. Even if it's not a magical weapon, I can already tell that the blade is much more durable than the original ever was. Goblin-dropped blades tend to be trash for durability, even if they have decent magic. Wiz replied. With the core ground, Dominic pulled the blade from the forge and sprinkled the dust over both sides of the blade, letting the heat stick it to the surface, then stepped outside and unleashed dragon flame on the blade, lighting it up white-hot and merging the core dust into the surface. Tiny words appeared on the blacksmithing trade skill gem. Creation complete. Random dragon magic effect, blood boil, causes additional burning damage on hit. Uncommon magical item. Blade of Blood Boil, created at Apprentice Level 2. The blade was jet black, with a red hilt that seemed to shine a bit in the dim light. Dominic admired it for a moment, then handed it to Wiz. "How does that feel in your hand?" It came out really well, and the dragon fire seems to have really brought the steel to life. "I tried to make it a bit larger than average since you're larger than average, to give you more range," he explained. "This is beautiful. I don't think I've ever seen a blade of this quality before, much less actually held one. Can you always make this quality of weapons?" Wiz asked. "Magical quality? Unlikely. It's a somewhat random effect from the dragon fire. I have no idea what it will create next time. But the blade itself is something that I can make given enough time." He reluctantly agreed. "Well, then I will have to make sure that nobody else gets their hands on it to inspect it, because any of the merchants would be able to tell who made it," Wiz explained, then immediately had the blade taken from him by Bella, who was staring at it in awe. "It really does have power. A crafted, uncommon, magical blade. You know, even if you haven't made it to journeyman blacksmith, you could make a fortune at the magical item shops with this sort of craftsmanship," Bella gushed, before having the blade stolen back from her. While making money was always a goal for anyone who had nothing, that wasn't Dominic's goal. Getting into the palace forges, where he could be around people with real influence, was more important to him right now. Wealth and fame could come later. Are you trying to get him kidnapped? You know how those shops are. If they see a chance to make a gold, they will do anything to get it. Selling crafted items would just draw their attention to Dominic, and he's only a new apprentice right now. Wiz reminded his gun-slinging fiancé. "Right, I forgot about that. But that thing is worth some serious money. Like new farm money." "Well, maybe not a good farm, but you get my point." At this level of enhancement, Pops had said that it should sell for about 4,000 silver as an uncommon blade, so 400 small gold coins. That would definitely buy a small house in town, or a bit of bad farmland, which was generally more valuable and desirable than a shack in the city. "Well, at least we can go hunting now that our team leader has his sword back. Is there any other gear that needs to be fixed, or can we call it a night?" "It got late before I even noticed," Dominic asked. "Get some sleep. We will head out first thing in the morning after breakfast." Wiz agreed, and Dominic turned to the forge shack. "Where are you going?" the big woman asked. "It's warm in there. I've gotten used to sleeping over the forge." Dominic laughed. "There's no room for a bed in there. I'll get you an extra blanket, but the air shouldn't be too cold overnight with so many of us in the house." Terry joked with a gesture toward the small, two-bedroom farmhouse. Chapter 28. It's warm in the forge. He was wrong. When Dominic woke up on the thin mattress spread out on the floor in the living room, he was freezing. Nobody else seemed to be cold, and Wiz's mother had the window open in the kitchen as she cooked breakfast for everyone, so it had to be an issue of perception. "I really need to get used to sleeping somewhere other than over the forge," Dominic mumbled as he got to his feet and brushed his hands through his blonde hair. It was getting rather long now, and he should probably cut it soon. "I'm sure you'll adapt quick enough once you're away from the city for a bit. But there should be food. Wiz's mom is a fantastic cook," Bella assured him. Wiz nodded in agreement and smoothed his tunic shirt before gliding into the kitchen with surprising grace for his size. While they ate, Wiz outlined the plan for the day. There have been numerous attacks near the tree line coming from Signia City, but on the other sides of town, the attacks have been mostly in the forest. I have a theory that is because the goblins are avoiding camping near the main road and can only catch the convoys when they get close. It's not perfect, but I think that if we go along here, we should find some smaller groups that will be easier to clear out. There is a guard patrol going to the same region today, so we will stay near them and pick up what we can for kills. 3 of us isn't really enough, no matter how high our individual damage output is, so staying near the patrol is for our safety," the big crusader explained. "I won't disagree with that. My first trip out was with 24 students, and it was a disaster. Even a few more competent people around can make a big difference." Dominic agreed. Bella gave him a suspicious look. 24 students? That wouldn't be the students who went out with the Duke's son and the princess, would it? Dominic sighed. "I didn't realize that the fiasco was public knowledge." Bella shook her head. "Not quite public knowledge. My friend in the city is obsessed with the royal family, and when she heard that the youngest princess had brought a young male friend with her to the dinner, she immediately started looking into it so she could plan on how to have it be her next time.
Was laughed.
And what did she say when she found out that she would have to go out into the wilderness with the paladin princess and risk her life twice? I know who Bella's talking about, and she's definitely not the type. Dominic looked at the big crusader. Seriously, does everyone know? Wiz shrugged. Bella told me the story last night. I just had to connect the dots when I found out it was you. Then he got to his feet and carefully equipped a ragged set of plate armor over a rough leather base, while Dominic patiently waited to finish equipping the workwear of a seasoned warrior. It looked sturdy enough, but very crude and poorly made. Dominic wouldn't say anything, but the next time was asked for that to be repaired, he would try to improve it at least a little bit. Not out of some sense of chivalry. Simply because that crude workmanship was painful to look at. The shield was likewise very crude, and Dominic realized why. They were both common-grade magical items that had been obtained from killing the goblins. The crude appearance and poor workmanship was a common theme to all items gained from the goblins, even though the actual defense that it provided was still better than most non-magical items. When he got back to Signia City, Dominic hoped that he would be able to get another forge rune out of Pops, one for defense, so that he could create magical items without the need for the secret dragonfire trick that he had just learned from the voices in his head. Come to think of it, he should really be more freaked out about that. Hearing voices in your head was not normal. Hearing voices that gave you accurate magical crafting advice went way beyond not normal. In fact, the more he thought about it, the less plausible it seemed. And now the voices were laughing at him. Well, it wasn't like it was the first time that he had heard the voices. They had just been silent for a while now. Since he entered Signia City, come to think of it, we should get going, or we're not going to catch up to the guard patrol. He suggested, hoping to change the topic away from his dinner with the princesses. You're right, we need to go. Just know that this topic is not over. We need to know everything. Bella informed him as she checked her gear for the day. She had chosen cloth pants and shirt with a leather jacket, none of which were going to be great for armor value, as they weren't magical in any way, but they gave her great mobility to shoot. They were definitely going to need some more close combat fighters. Wiz led them out to the road, and then stopped with a smile on his face, looking back toward the city. What's up, Wiz? Bella asked. Garrison Commander Asher is in the group today, he replied, without looking back. How he knew that, Dominic didn't know, but seconds later, he saw the banner of the guard patrol over the fences, with an additional banner that must be the mark of the garrison commander. Wiz had simply seen them first because he could see over the fences and hedgerows. The column marched right up to them without slowing, but Dominic didn't miss the smile on the commander's face when he saw Wiz waiting for him, or the curious looks the other guards were giving the trio. They fell in beside the column, and the commander raised his voice to give an order. These young adventurers will be joining us on our hunt today. Include them in one of our teams when we split to hunt for the goblins. I've got the feeling that today is the day, he announced. Dominic ignored the fact that the commander hadn't even questioned what their skill set might be and looked at the soldier beside him, who whispered an answer as he marched along in the line. The commander already knows both of them well enough. He believes that someone is guiding the goblins. The attacks don't make sense as goblin tactics. If there really is a champion of some sort among the goblins, he intends to be the one to find proof of it and stamp out the threat before it gets worse. The guard quietly informed Dominic, with a determined look that said he agreed with the sentiment. I think he's right. I just don't know if we're going to find it here, or if the answer is in some other village's territory. Dominic whispered back, earning himself a smile from the guard. We will see. But I heard that whoever finds it will get a special reward from the royal family. Maybe even a promotion to officer or a titled acreage. The guard's eyes shone with eagerness at that. Becoming a baronet through acts of valor was rare, but it was one of the few ways that anyone could ascend into the nobility. Even if the farm barely earned a living, or the baronet leased it out to sharecroppers, they would ascend into a new tier of society. The commander raised his voice again as they got near the trees. We're in luck, gentlemen. Fresh footprints. Who is taking the crusader and his friends into their team? He called. Team 1 could use the ranged firepower. No worries, Commander. We will take good care of your whiz. The man beside Dominic called back, while the rest of his team tried not to chuckle at the commander's look of sheepish annoyance. Dominic didn't quite understand who he thought that he was fooling. Even he could tell that the commander was trying to recruit the big crusader. Chapter 29: Village Guards and Crusaders. The group of guardsmen was made up almost entirely of warrior skill gem-equipped soldiers with combat gems and spellstones around level 5, but with one cleric among them for healing. Each additional level applied to a spellstone would increase the effect of the magic by somewhere between 20 and 25% compared to a level 1 magical skill. So for the common masses, 1 or 2 extra levels on a primary attack gem was a huge difference. The addition of the 3 adventurers gave them a slightly stronger lead fighter, as well as a higher damage ranged fighter and Dominic, whose abilities none of them really understood. They would find out soon enough when they got into a fight, but with crafters, it could be hit or miss what actual combat abilities they had when they were still young. But there was one thing that they all knew. Dominic was the blacksmith that came in with a caravan last night, and if you got in good with an apprentice blacksmith, you could save a fortune on repairs and new equipment in the long term. The village had multiple smithy forges, most of which dealt with vehicle repairs and magitech items. Ones that were willing to take the drudgery of repairing armor and properly sharpening weapons were much harder to find, and most of the guardsmen either did it themselves if they could, or took it to the toolmaker. So, they wouldn't turn down his help, despite the fact that he was only a level 2 blacksmith apprentice. As an innate magic user, that mattered less than a level 2 enhanced frontline warrior, who would take much more damage and be less able to block attacks. A lower-level caster simply didn't do as much damage. But most goblins died against any magical attack, so it wasn't as much of an issue. The guards let Wiz lead the team into the trees, following the footprints that the garrison commander had found. They didn't follow the main group, instead Wiz led them down a side path to see where the goblins had branched off to. If it was not a diversion, it would likely be an ambush site or a hunting camp where they were collecting food. Both were important targets to eliminate, and with for guards, a cleric and Dominic's group, they shouldn't have too many problems taking out an ambush team. The signs of movement through the forest became more and more clear the further that they went into the trees, and before long they could hear goblins talking and the crackle of a campfire. Wiz looked back at the team and gave them a series of hand signals to close in tight on his shoulders when he charged, and to keep 2 of the warriors back to prevent the goblins from surrounding the ranged attackers. Bella carefully moved forward until she could see the camp, and then climbed up into a tree to give herself a better firing line, while Dominic moved behind the cleric so that if anything came from the back, the healer wasn't the first one to take the attack. The goblin camp was similar in size to the group that ambushed the convoy, about 40 goblins in total, but this time they didn't need to guard a set of steam carriages full of valuable trade goods, and they could just fight. The team didn't make a sound as they charged into the goblin camp until they activated their first skills. For Wiz, that was Consecration and Area Damage ability, while for the warriors it was Cleave, which sent out an energy blade in an arc that followed the path of their weapon for a few meters in front of them. The skills themselves didn't make any noise, but the flashes of light as the gems activated and the sound of wounded and dying goblins were unmistakable. The skills cut a swathe through the goblins and forced them to regroup if they wanted to survive. Bella began to fire from her perch in the trees, and Dominic aimed arcane blasts between the warriors to pick off the goblins who tried to circle around them. Every goblin that he got a clear view of got a matching spell to the face, dropping the small green monsters into a growing pile of corpses at the edge of the semicircle of melee fighters. "How is your mana holding up?" the cleric asked as Dominic used 2 arcane blasts in rapid succession. "It's good. I get a bit of regeneration on kill," he replied, to hide the fact that his primary attack spell didn't actually use any internally stored mana. That was much too strange to explain to others, and far too easy to exploit if they knew about it and wanted to make him do all the work. Mana on kill is a fantastic gem bonus. But it's a bit savage for a smith, isn't it? The cleric asked a bit dubiously. Fighting is fighting, and smithing is smithing. It's better to keep the 2 separate in your mind. But there are more advantages to having combat bonuses than just a bit of mana regeneration. Besides, the goblins have materials that I need. Dominic replied with his best gentle smile to set the cleric's mind at ease. While they were joking, Dominic took out 3 more goblins who had tried to encircle their position, keeping the pressure off the guards on their flanks and allowing Bella more time to reload. She wasn't wasting ammunition on grand volleys like she had when they burst through the fight yesterday. Instead, she was picking them off one at a time, carefully placing her shots so that the fight didn't cost her more than it earned. The group began to push forward as the goblins were cleared from the camp, and the stragglers started to run, which made Bella jump down from her spot in the tree and jog over to the group past the piles of corpses. Looting this is going to suck. Sure, the cores go straight to your storage, but the bounty on goblins demands a left ear. She muttered to Dominic under her breath. It was the only sure way to prove that you had really done the job, and someone would notice pretty quickly if there was a group of goblins running around without one ear. The forest around them fell silent, marking the last of the visible goblins' deaths, but Dominic didn't relax just yet. He had seen how sneaky they could be with their underground hiding spots. The guards had also been informed of the tricks they were playing near the capital and the attempt to ambush the princess during her hunting trip. So, each destroyed hut was checked while the bodies were stripped of any spare weapons and their ears, a task that the guards were kind enough to take on themselves. Did anyone get anything good from the drops? The team leader asked, checking faces to see if any of his men were hiding something from him. As city guards, the drops belonged to the town, and the guards got a portion of the revenue when they were sold. It was one of the ways that the council kept everything funded and running as smoothly as possible. Dominic sorted through his drops. Copper daggers, mana cores, filthy cloth, a few bags of coins, a common magic dagger, and finally one blue-colored scroll caught his attention. He had gotten a rare drop. Mana revolver pattern. According to the introduction at the top of the scroll, that should be usable by those with blacksmith, gunsmith, and artificer skills. Dominic quickly read the next paragraph. Creates a revolver that may be reloaded for 6 mana. Damage determined on creation. It was beautiful, everything that a weaponsmith could ever hope for. Well, it was still a revolver, which Dominic didn't really know how to use, but still, it was an actual rare recipe drop. Maybe in this life, fate really did favor him. Pops had been adamant that the masters were hiding away all the good recipes. But perhaps that also worked the other way. Those who got the good recipes became mastersmiths. Chapter 30, Goblin Fashion. I got a magic dagger. Dominic offered while taking it out of his storage cube to show the team leader. Not bad. We can always use more magical weapons. How do you feel about a trade? The team leader asked. A trade? Yeah, I got an armor drop, but it is only really good for ladies or magic types. It's also a common magic item, so the values are equivalent, but I see that you're using ordinary armor with an excellent magical dagger and sword. He offered. I would feel better with some magic armor, even if the drops from the goblins tend to look pretty shabby. Dominic chuckled as he handed him the dagger. You're right about that. The monster blessing does have a strange sense of aesthetics when it comes to goblin-dropped loot. If we were a bit higher level, we could head out into the hills and join the guards there, but level 10 on both your primary attack and defense gems is the minimum since they get level 12 and 15 ogre clans. You might be fast enough to run off, but at our level as warriors, we would just get squished. One of the guards laughed. Dominic smiled at them and shrugged. It's a gift. Unlike the warriors who solve everything with brute strength, I'm much happier when things die way over there. The guard laughed as he passed over the pile of cloth, which Dominic examined carefully to see if it was going to be worth equipping. The guard had said it was mostly for women and mages, which was a touch insulting. But he was a magic user from their point of view. What he got was a somewhat tattered black mage robe that could be worn over his existing leather pants, decorated with simple magical runes along the edges, and a simple cloth harness to carry potions and weapons on, should you prefer not to keep them in storage. Paired with his long leather coat and the brass cogwork down the sleeves, he actually looked like a normal traveling mage, and he no longer needed to keep the stifling coat closed to keep the battered state of his combat gear from embarrassing him in public. The mage robes looked like they were in rough shape, but they were magical, and that made them immediately better fashion than what he had in the eyes of the guards and most others. I like it. It's comfortable, not too heavy, not too breezy. Plus, it's got some decent armor, increased magic on it. Dominic informed them with a smile. Not a lot of increase, but as a common grade magical item, that was to be expected. Still, it was better than what he had, and now he was more comfortable in the summer heat. Alright, let's get a move on. If there's one raiding camp, there's got to be more. How is everyone on mana and healing? Was called out to the group. We're all good, when the cleric is boss man. One of the guards called back. Wiz's attention turned to the cleric, whose weathered face wrinkled as he smiled back at him. I'm back over 3/4 of my mana. That fight went remarkably smoothly, with 2 extra ranged attackers. Lead the way, and let's try to create an incident-free day for the caravans. Wiz picked up on the trails of more goblins right from the edge of the camp and led the group further into the woods, back toward the city. The guards weren't as loud as Dominic had expected, given their heavy armor, and it was only a few minutes before the sound of combat alerted the group that there was an attack on the road. Wiz and the guard team moved with well-practiced efficiency, nearly leaving Dominic and Bella behind as they shifted position to rush forward. The 2 ranged fighters ran along behind the group, keeping the cleric safely in the middle of the formation while the warriors crashed into the goblins' backs. Dominic picked off the goblins who were going for the caravan instead of the guards, while Bella targeted any spot where the goblins outnumbered the defenders. With the additional forces, the fight was over in seconds. The goblins didn't have the tactical knowledge to fight while surrounded, and once their backs were exposed, it was a simple matter to dispose of them. The cleric and Wiz both moved through the caravan guards as the last of the goblins were eliminated, healing the injured, and making sure that the vehicles would be able to go on. This caravan was a bit different from the one that Dominic had been employed by. They didn't use the steam trucks. They used a row of Magitech steam-powered tractors, each pulling a pair of trailers. The setup held a remarkable amount of cargo, but looking at the design, it was much better suited to good roads or soft fields than the bumpy and rutted back roads to the village. Once the trailers were stuck in the mud, even the steel spikes of the tractor wheels would struggle to pull them out, he assumed. But the merchants looked to be fairly well off, and the guard team was higher level, so maybe he was wrong, and those tractors were more capable than he gave them credit for. The caravan leader bowed to Wiz and the team leader. Thanks for your assistance. The trucks are almost good to go. Just a few repairs to make, and we will be on our way. One of the push rods was damaged in the attack. We just need to get it back on, and that's the worst of it. Dominic jogged over to where an aging dwarf was glaring at the mangled metal beam and the snapped bolt that should have held it to the input shaft for the axle. This was a great chance to learn a bit more about vehicle repair, which seemed to be a pretty lucrative trade for a traveling blacksmith. Need a hand? He asked. You know anything about steel? The dwarf retorted, inspecting Dominic through a brass-framed monocle. Enough to know that's not made of steel, and that it will soften up real nice in my travel forge if you've got a good oil to temper it back up to standards in afterwards. Dominic replied. Thorin, son of Domar, Thane of Graska. The dwarf introduced himself, extending his hand for a handshake. Dominic Wavemates, apprentice of Pops, from Signia City. He replied. The dwarf burst into laughter, then looked at his serious expression and began to laugh even harder. Boy, I wouldn't go telling people that if I were you. They'll put you right to work when they find out. Thorin chortled. He pointed back to the middle of the caravan, the usual spot for the caravan's smithy carriage, and then continued. Get that arm pulled, and I'll get the forge ready. I've got a spare spindle bolt, so we won't need to make one of them today. Dominic double-checked that the team wasn't going to leave him behind, but it looked like the caravan guards were taking out the soup pots, so they should have an hour to get the tractors in working order before the food was ready. Normally, they wouldn't cook while they were on the road. They would eat something cold and simple, but as they weren't going anywhere anyhow, there was no harm in it, other than the smell of cooking food. One swat with the hammer and chisel had the nut loosened on the front of the shaft, and then Dominic realized that he was going to have a small problem. The beam weighed well over 60 kilos, and he could barely carry the weight in both arms, but to get it repaired, he would have to lift it into the forge trailer. It was a bit of a depressing reminder that his body was still in the growth phase, even after his 20th birthday, but he wasn't going to let that get him down. Given time, he would get his strength up to a more reasonable standard. I don't suppose I can borrow one of you fine gentlemen for a moment. This thing is surprisingly heavy, he asked with a sigh. Of course. Jack, John, grab an end and bring that beam to Thorin. He should have the forge hot by now. The caravan boss shouted to a pair of his larger members. Dominic gave one last swing of the hammer to knock the damaged spindle bolt out of its hole, and then followed them to the forge. A bit of observation would go a long way to teaching him about how the experienced dwarves would fix a bend like that without weakening the metal.